There is a financial mistake that can cost you almost nothing at 25, barely noticeable at 30, and become brutally expensive by 40. The frightening part? It usually doesn't look like a mistake when you're making it. You're working. Your income is growing. You're paying your bills. Maybe you have a retirement account, a house, or a decent amount of savings. From the outside, your financial life looks fine. And that's exactly what makes this dangerous. Because most financial mistakes don't begin with someone being reckless. They begin with someone being responsible, but constantly telling themselves they'll deal with the bigger decisions later. You'll save more when your income increases. You'll pay down the debt when things settle down. You'll finally figure out retirement when the kids are older. And each decision sounds reasonable. There's no dramatic moment. No alarm goes off. No notification appears on your phone saying, "You're falling behind." Life simply keeps moving. Another year passes. Then another. Your salary goes up. Then the apartment gets better. The car gets newer. The bills get bigger. And suddenly, the raise you thought would give you breathing room has disappeared. And somewhere along the way, something changes. You stop making decisions based on what your future needs, and start making them based on what your present can tolerate. Because the present always has a reason. There's always another bill, another priority, another expense that feels more urgent. And slowly, without one catastrophic decision, your financial future gets pushed further into the distance. Not because you don't care about it, but because today keeps giving you a reason to choose today. When you're 25, later feels almost unlimited. At 30, it still feels comfortably far away. But as you approach 40, the same word starts carrying a very different price. And the older you get, the more expensive later becomes. But here's where this stops being just a mindset problem. Because time isn't simply something that passes. In wealth building, time is an asset. And unlike money, you can't earn more of it. At 25, a financial mistake can be painful. But you still have decades to recover. You can rebuild your savings, change careers, increase your income, pay down debt, take a wrong turn, learn from it, and still have enough runway to change direction. At 40, those options haven't disappeared, but the runway is shorter. And that changes the cost of almost every financial decision you make. Take something as simple as $10,000. Imagine, purely as a hypothetical example, that it earned an average 7% annually. At a hypothetical 7% annual return, $10,000 compounded for 35 years would grow to roughly $106,000 before taxes and fees. Over 20 years, it would be roughly $39,000. Same $10,000. Same hypothetical return. Different amount of time. That's the part people underestimate. The cost of delay isn't always the money you spend. Sometimes it's the growth you never gave your money enough time to achieve. And this is why two people can make the exact same financial mistake, with the exact same amount of money, and experience completely different consequences. The number on the receipt is the same. The time attached to it isn't. And as you get older, you're not simply losing years on a calendar. You're losing opportunities to recover. A career mistake can be followed by another decade of higher earnings. A period of overspending can be followed by years of aggressive saving. A financial setback can be rebuilt. But eventually, there are fewer next decades available to fix what happened during the last one. That's the age multiplier. Not because your money suddenly becomes less valuable. Because the amount of time available to recover becomes smaller. And that means a decision that feels almost harmless at 25 can become remarkably expensive at 40. Not because the decision suddenly changed. Because the amount of time available to undo it did. So now we can name the mistake. It isn't that you're not saving enough. It isn't that you made one terrible investment. And it isn't necessarily that you spend too much. The mistake is much quieter. You keep postponing financial freedom until you feel more ready for it. You tell yourself you'll get serious when your income is higher, when the mortgage is smaller, when the kids need less, when work becomes less demanding, when you finally have enough money to breathe. And that sounds reasonable, because you're not saying, I don't care about my future. You're saying, I'll take care of it when I can do it properly. But when I'm ready has no fixed date. There's always another expense, another responsibility, another year that feels like it should be easier. And without realizing it, you can spend your entire 30s preparing to start. You may even be doing many things right. You're earning more. You're saving something. You're paying your bills. You're contributing to retirement. Your net worth might even be increasing. But underneath all of that, there can still be one dangerous assumption: that your future self will have more time, more money, and more freedom than you have today. Maybe they will, but maybe they won't. Your future self isn't a completely different person who suddenly receives a new life. They're you, with whatever decisions you make today following them forward. And this is why delay is so deceptive. If you make a reckless financial decision, you usually know something went wrong. But when you postpone an important decision, nothing happens immediately. You get to keep your current lifestyle. You avoid the uncomfortable conversation. You avoid the sacrifice. You avoid changing something that feels like it's working. And because there is no immediate pain, your brain interprets the decision as harmless, until the years begin adding up. But there's an even deeper trap. The people most likely to make this mistake aren't necessarily financially careless. They're often the people doing reasonably well. Because when life is falling apart financially, the problem is obvious. But when everything looks fine, it's much easier to keep waiting. And here's where the psychology gets uncomfortable. Because capable people can build a perfectly reasonable argument for almost any delay. I'll invest more when my income goes up. The market feels too expensive right now. I'll start once I understand investing properly. My career is still growing. I have plenty of time. I'll deal with the debt first. I'll optimize everything once my finances are more stable. Notice something. None of these statements sound stupid. That's what makes them dangerous. Each one can be perfectly rational on its own. The problem begins when rational explanations become permanent excuses. You keep preparing. You keep researching. You keep waiting for the right income, the right market, the right moment, the right amount of certainty. And eventually, preparation becomes a substitute for action. You know more about what you should do, but your financial life hasn't moved nearly as far as your knowledge has. That's the trap. Permanent preparation without meaningful progress. Preparation gives you the feeling of control without forcing you to experience the discomfort of change. You can tell yourself you're being cautious. You're being responsible. You're waiting for better conditions. And because you're intelligent enough to explain the delay, you don't have to confront what the delay is actually costing you. But time doesn't care how convincing your explanation is. It keeps moving. And then something happens somewhere around midlife that nobody puts on your spreadsheet. The future you kept planning for quietly becomes your present. But that's not even the most expensive part. There's another cost to waiting that rarely appears on a financial statement. It doesn't show up as a fee. You won't see it on your bank account. And you can't always calculate it in dollars. It's the cost of losing options. When you're younger, you have something that money can't completely replace. Room to change your mind. You can leave a career that isn't working. Take a lower-paying job and learn something new. Move somewhere cheaper. Work longer if you need to. Cut your lifestyle. Increase your savings. Make a mistake. and still have time for that mistake to become a lesson instead of a permanent consequence. That's what time gives you. Options. But as the years pass, some of those options quietly become more expensive. A career change at 25 can feel like an experiment. At 45, it might mean walking away from a salary your family depends on. Working another decade sounds different when you're 30 than when you're 55. Moving somewhere cheaper sounds simple. Until your children are settled, your parents need you nearby, and your entire life is built around one place. Even rebuilding your savings becomes harder when you're no longer asking, "How much can I accumulate?" You're asking, "How much time do I have left to accumulate it?" And that's why the real cost of financial delay isn't always the money you lose. Sometimes it's the choices you lose. The ability to say no to a bad job, to walk away from an unhealthy financial commitment, to take a calculated risk, to slow down without panicking about the next paycheck. You may still have money. You may still have a career. You may still have a comfortable life. But if your financial decisions have quietly made you dependent on everything continuing exactly as it is, then you've lost something far more valuable than cash. You've lost flexibility. And that's the invisible bill. Because the most expensive financial mistakes don't always take money from you. Sometimes they take choices away from you. Now imagine you're 52. Not broke. Not buried in debt. Not staring at an empty bank account. Your income is decent. Your children are older and don't need you in quite the same way anymore. Your mortgage is manageable. You still take a vacation once in a while. From the outside, your life looks pretty good. And then one evening, you finally sit down and calculate what you actually need to retire. Not what you hope you'll need. Not what you think you'll need. What the numbers actually require. And that's when the feeling changes. Because nothing has gone catastrophically wrong. You didn't lose everything. You didn't make some ridiculous investment. You didn't ruin your finances in one weekend. You simply realize that the version of retirement you imagined requires more time than you have left to build it comfortably. And suddenly, all those years when you told yourself, "I'll get serious later," look different. The raise you enjoyed but never redirected toward your future. The debt you plan to eliminate next year. The years you spent waiting for the perfect time to start. None of those decisions felt dangerous when you made them. That's the cruel part. You weren't necessarily making terrible decisions. You were making small, reasonable decisions in favor of the present. Over and over again. And now your future is asking you to pay for all of them at once. Not with one enormous bill. With fewer choices. Maybe you can work longer. Maybe you can save more aggressively. Maybe you can change your lifestyle. Maybe you can delay the retirement you imagined. You still have options. But they aren't the same options you had at 30. And that's the realization that hurts the most. The problem wasn't that you failed. You simply started later than you needed to. And sometimes, the hardest financial regret isn't remembering the money you lost. It's realizing what that money could have bought you. Time. But here's the part one don't want you to misunderstand. 40 is not too late. You haven't missed some invisible deadline. The point isn't that your financial future is already decided. The point is that 40 is too expensive a time to keep pretending you have unlimited time. Because once you understand what time is actually worth, the goal changes. You're no longer trying to look wealthy. You're trying to become financially difficult to trap. And you don't need a perfect financial plan. You need decisions that make later less dangerous. Number 1. Stop optimizing for appearance. The car. The house. The neighborhood. The vacations. The things that make your life look successful from the outside. None of them matter if maintaining the appearance of wealth keeps you dependent on a paycheck. After 40, the question isn't, "How wealthy do I look?" It's, "How much of my life can I control?" Number 2. Optimize for financial flexibility. Build the ability to say no. An emergency fund isn't just money sitting in an account. It's the ability to leave a bad situation without immediately becoming desperate. Lower fixed expenses aren't just about saving money. They're about creating room to move. And reducing debt isn't only about paying interest. It's about removing future obligations from your life. Flexibility is wealth you can actually use. Number 3. Find the thing your future self can't afford to carry. Don't try to fix everything at once. Ask yourself, what expense or responsibility could create the biggest constraint on my future freedom? It might be housing, debt, supporting family, education costs, healthcare, or simply the lifestyle you've gradually built. Find the biggest one, because solving the largest future constraint is usually more powerful than optimizing 10 tiny expenses. Number 4. Reduce the decisions that permanently lock in your expenses. Every major financial commitment is a decision your future self has to keep paying for. A larger house, a larger car, a larger lifestyle, a larger monthly obligation. Before making the next permanent commitment, ask, will this purchase give my future self more freedom or less? That's a very different question from, can I afford the payment? Number 5. Make the next 5 to 10 years intentional. Not perfect. Intentional. You don't need to predict the market. You don't need to become a financial expert. You need to know where you're going. How much flexibility do you want? What debt needs to disappear? What expenses need to shrink? What income needs to increase? What does financial freedom actually mean for you? Because after 40, vague financial intentions become dangerous. Someday I'll be ready isn't a plan. A direction, a deadline, and a series of deliberate decisions is. And that's the real reversal. You're not trying to recover the years you lost. You can't. You're trying to make sure the years you still have finally start working for you. Remember the mistake we talked about at the beginning? It wasn't buying the wrong stock. It wasn't missing some secret investment. It wasn't one terrible financial decision that suddenly destroyed your future. It was something much quieter. Believing that later would always be cheaper than today. Later when you earned more. Later when the kids were older. Later when the mortgage was smaller. Later when life finally became less complicated. And the strange thing is, sometimes waiting really does save you money. Waiting can help you avoid a bad purchase. It can keep you from making an emotional investment. It can give you time to think. But there's a difference between waiting for the right decision and waiting indefinitely to make an important one. Because financial freedom isn't something that suddenly becomes urgent when you retire. It's built or postponed through thousands of ordinary decisions long before then. Every year you delay matters. Not because you're doomed, not because 40 is too late, but because the older you get, the less time you have for your money, your career, and your decisions to recover from being postponed. That's why the most expensive financial decision might not be something you bought. It might be something you kept telling yourself you would do someday. And if you're over 40, the goal isn't to panic. It's to stop treating time like it's unlimited. You don't need to become wealthy overnight. You don't need a perfect portfolio. You don't need to undo the past. You simply need to stop making your future self responsible for decisions you're capable of making today. Because sometimes waiting saves money. But when it comes to financial freedom, waiting can be the most expensive decision you make. And after 40, you're not just trying to build wealth. You're trying to buy back the time you once assumed you had. Before you leave, ask yourself one question. What financial decision am I postponing because I assume I'll have more time later? If you already know the answer, don't wait for the perfect moment to deal with it. And if you're comfortable sharing it, tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the first step toward changing your financial future is admitting what you've been postponing. The goal isn't to look rich. It's to make sure your future self still has choices.